This is Eugenia Gibbons, the Clean Energy Director at Mass Energy Consumers Alliance, and I'm joined this evening by Joel Wool, who's the Energy and Environment Advocate at Clean Water Action. Joel and I are going to be discussing the Massachusetts RPS, which is an important policy here in Massachusetts and across the country. So, all right, so just quickly to review the agenda for the evening, we're going to provide a quick introduction to the current renewable portfolio standard. We're going to also discuss the ways that the RPS is very integral to compliance with the Global Warming Solutions Act. We'll review some of the key findings from a recent analysis by Synapse Energy Economics and Sustainable Energy Advantage. And then we'll talk about kind of the proposed next steps in terms of strengthening the RPS, including key takeaways and messaging that we're hoping folks will coalesce around. Next steps legislatively, and then we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. With regard to webinar logistics, as I noted, I have everyone muted to avoid background noise. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to enter them using the chat feature on your screen. You can also send me an email at eugenia@massenergy.org, but the chat feature seems to be the best way to get a real-time response. And during Q&A, I will unmute folks as needed. So just really quickly, let's go ahead and begin. Again, if you have any difficulty hearing me or hearing Joel, use the chat feature as well. So what is an RPS? What is the Renewable Portfolio Standard? Well, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, as you can see on the screen, are a foundation for clean energy markets and are a proven policy tool to support successful, cost-effective renewable energy development at the state level. Essentially what RPSs are is a requirement that a minimum amount of electricity supply be met with qualifying renewable resources. Massachusetts is one of 29 states and DC that has a renewable portfolio standard in place. And the image that you see on the screen is an infographic from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL. They conducted a study a few years ago looking at the benefits and impacts of renewable portfolio standards nationwide. And ultimately what they found is that in 2013, which is the data they were using, the benefits of an RPS, particularly related to environmental benefits, far outweighed any costs associated with achieving environmental compliance. And that doesn't even speak to the job impacts, the impacts on reducing wholesale electricity supply, and of course the importance of the RPSs across the country in reducing and displacing natural gas consumption. So the RPS is a driver of renewable energy development. The reason why renewable portfolio standards are important are because they promote energy diversity, they spur local and regional clean energy job growth, they displace GHG emitting resources like natural gas, as I just mentioned, and they stabilize the renewables that are brought online, help to stabilize energy prices, and that in turn reduces the vulnerability to price volatility that's inherent to natural gas. So the image on the screen is just a nice snapshot of the various states in the country that have an RPS in place, and the ones that don't. Only a handful don't. Massachusetts RPS has been in place since 2003. So it was actually created as part of the 1997 Restructuring Act. That act basically required utilities to break apart, and utilities that were responsible for distributing electricity were no longer able to own generation. And also as part of restructuring, the utilities were given a period of time to comply with those new requirements, And that included a 6-year period where they were able to begin complying with the Renewable Portfolio Standard. So in Massachusetts, since 2003, we've seen a number of renewable resources come online to meet the requirements set by the RPS. In 2007, when the Green Communities Act was passed, the Massachusetts RPS was modified slightly, and we were an increase of 1% per year indefinitely was established. So the RPS continues to grow by 1% per year forever, pardon me. There was also a distinction made between the types of resources that could be, how resources were categorized within the RPS. So we talk a lot about Class 1. That simply means new resources, items, or facilities in service, in operation since 1997. Anything that was built before 1997 is considered a Class 2 resource. And you can see on the screen that some of the eligible technologies include solar, wind, anaerobic digestion, for example. RPSs, as I said, are important because they send a signal to the market that there's going to be consistent and regular demand for renewable projects. And by creating that annually increasing demand, more and more renewables are needed to come online. So suppliers are able to meet the mandate of the RPS. This slide just provides a nice snapshot of how much the RPS actually produces, how much energy the RPS represents. So in 2017, we're currently required to have 12% of our electricity supply be met with renewable resources. That will equal about 5.76 million megawatt hours from Class 1 renewables, or more than enough to power 800,000 Massachusetts homes each year. And to the right, you can see what a mix of those resources would look like to meet that demand. You see some wind, some solar, there's some landfill gas, and a small amount of biomass. I will note that the Massachusetts RPS applies only to investor-owned utilities and competitive suppliers, so anybody who's providing electricity to a customer, for example, in Eversource territory or National Grid territory, or if you use a competitive supplier. Municipal lighting plants, which account for about 13 to 15% of Massachusetts load, are exempt from the Renewable Portfolio Standard. They're also exempt from Massachusetts energy efficiency programs. That's a provision that's included in the Green Communities Act. So the other thing that is worth noting is that renewable energy is, a renewable energy project is valued for two reasons: for the electricity that it generates, and also for the green attribute of the project. So the way that we keep track of the green attribute, because there's not really any way to know for certain that the megawatt created from the turbine is going into your house or mine, the way that we track that attribute is through something called a renewable energy certificate. And the green attribute is separate from the electricity that's generated by the project. One REC is 1 megawatt hour is what 1 REC represents. And the way that we keep track of this is that the Department of Energy Resources maintains a database of eligible projects and the RECs associated with the energy or the electricity generated by those projects. Electricity suppliers buy as many RECs per year as required by the RPS, and then they're able to demonstrate to regulatory officials that they are in fact meeting the requirements of the RPS. In the event that they fail to comply with that requirement, they will then have to pay what's called an alternative compliance payment. Those payments are, those funds are used to support renewable energy projects and climate mitigation projects. But for the most part, the electricity suppliers generally comply with the RPS. It's cheaper to comply than it is to pay an ACP. So this slide has a little animation, just shows you that when the turbine spins, it creates that megawatt hour. That electron of generation goes into the grid, cleans up the grid, and then there's also a REC generated. The rec goes into the database maintained by ISO New England, and the project's maintained by DOER. The value of those Class 1 RECs, the revenue generated by the sale of RECs is very important to a renewable energy developer because it makes the project financeable. So they sell the electricity, and they also sign up for a contract to sell the RECs. And as I noted, electricity suppliers buy RECs to demonstrate compliance with the RPS. Renewable developers rely on the revenue generated from those RECs to make the projects financeable. If the RPS is in place or continues to grow, it sends a signal to the market that there's sustained demand for those projects, for those RECs, and for those resources. And so it helps make projects financeable. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Joel, who's going to speak a little bit more about the Massachusetts climate commitments and the role of the RPS in meeting them.
Thanks, Eugenia. So Massachusetts, under the Global Warming Solutions Act, has requirements to do emissions reductions, greenhouse gas emissions reductions of 25% by 2020 and 80% by 2050 as compared to the emissions as they were in 1990. We are, progressing towards that, the first deadline, 2020. And actually, in a recent Supreme Court case in Massachusetts, the Supreme Court upheld the need for our Department of Environmental Protection to put out regulations and to really work towards those 2020 goals firmly. They're not loose targets, they're not aspirational, they're actually firm commitments that we are legally obligated to make. And I think they are scientifically corresponding to kind of doing our piece of the pie, if you will, our piece of the puzzle in solving the climate crisis. So where does the RPS come in? The Renewable Portfolio Standard is essential, absolutely essential, to moving towards certainly cleaner energy, but also to reducing emissions even in other sectors. Part of the reason why it's necessary is that as we move to heat with cleaner fuel and to drive cleaner vehicles or to ride green public transportation, we need the renewable electricity to power those vehicles, to heat those homes. So just to be clear, as we move forward, we're going to, people who drive cars, right, we're going to want them to shift over to driving electric vehicles. Some people are doing that today. There are now models coming out that have a 200-mile range. But we also want those electric vehicles to be powered by clean electricity. So yes, you can charge your electric vehicle at home, know that your power for your the energy that charged it came from wind and solar and anaerobic digestion, which by the way is kind of just like gigantic scale composting in a way. And so we will elevate our energy supply to be greener, accelerate our energy supply to be greener, and at the same time we will actually shift over other sectors. So the RPS is necessary for the renewable energy sectors, but it is also fundamental in our broad transition. And it is complemented by things like incentives for electric vehicles and other policies, for example, planning to have fewer cars on the road or to have more energy efficient homes. I think that is the primary stuff for this issue. What I would say is that accelerating the Renewable Portfolio Standard has been in the dialogue, and it was debated but ultimately left out of the comprehensive energy legislation, or nearly comprehensive energy legislation, that was passed in 2016. So the Massachusetts Senate wanted to accelerate the Renewable Portfolio Standard. The House did not at that time. But we did get wonderful things like contracts for offshore wind and some provisions around energy storage, among a number of other energy policies. So probably the hot topic in the legislative debates this year will be the Renewable Portfolio Standard, because it's actually necessary some increase is necessary just to keep energy markets where they are, and furthermore because a greater acceleration is necessary to really combat the climate crisis and do our due diligence. I think I can turn it back to Eugenia at this point.
Great. Thank you, Joel. So as Joel noted, the conversation about an increase in the RPS was started last legislative session, but certainly not finished. And because the conversation started, it raised some questions about what an RPS increase might look like. If it is in fact time for Massachusetts to consider adjusting its RPS, what should that level of adjustment be, and what would happen if we did so? So the Northeast Clean Energy Council, in partnership with Mass Energy, was able to procure an analysis by Sustainable Energy Advantage and Synapse Energy Economics that looked at different scenarios in which the RPS was increased. I will include at the end of these slides the breakdown of some of the assumptions that were made and sort of what went into the base case. But for purposes of this conversation, it's important to note that the base case looked at the current renewable portfolio standard, which is that increase of 1% per year indefinitely. I also looked at a scenario in which Massachusetts increased its RPS by 2% per year, a scenario in which Massachusetts increased by 2% per year and Connecticut also increased at 1.5% per year, and then a scenario in which Massachusetts increased 3% per year and Connecticut increased 1.5% per year. The reason why we looked at Massachusetts and Connecticut are because those are the two largest energy markets in the region. Together they comprise a significant portion of the regional load, and also because Connecticut was entertaining the possibility of increasing its renewable portfolio standard. That is a decision that has not yet been made. The findings of the analysis were rather interesting. It revealed that under the base case, as Joel noted, given the offshore wind procurements coming out of the bill last year, changes to the solar incentive program, or SMART, which is now going to be rolling out, existing contracts for distributed resources, and a number of other factors, basically there's more supply of renewable energy and renewable energy certificates than there is demand for under current RPS requirements. So remember, utilities purchase RECs, they purchase the amount that's required. They're not necessarily going to purchase more, and under the current scenario with a 1% per year increase in the RPS and all of the good things that are coming out of legislation and different advocacy around renewable energy, the demand is for RECs will exceed the demand. Some additional key findings are that the minimum 2% per year increase in Massachusetts is necessary to at least achieve balance in the REC market. The concern about the concern about supply of RECs exceeding demand is that that will cause the REC market to crash. And if the REC market crashes, it makes some other projects that are not necessarily included in the procurement set by statute, it makes them less financeable. So it jeopardizes the future of certain renewable energy projects. But increasing by at least 2% will at least balance that out. Additionally, the analysis determined that an increase in the renewable portfolio standard would also help to drive the development of new projects, incremental development of new renewable projects. The more that the RPS is increased, the greater that push will be, and the sooner we'll see the benefits and the impacts of new renewable projects being called for. So at a 3% per year, we see new renewables coming online and the demand coming online by the mid-20s, early 30s. A higher level of renewables leads to decreased wholesale energy prices. That is important because there's often a concern expressed that the renewables are costly and will drive expensive electricity prices. But what this study found is that actually, depending on the This found that actually the increased renewables displaces fossil fuel generation at a more accelerated pace, and so helps to stabilize prices and even bring them down. Joel, would you like to take this slide for me? Other key findings?
Sure. Are you transitioning it forward, or do you want to just look at the study?
Oh no, this is the next, sorry, this is analysis key findings, the jobs piece and the emission reduction goal.
Great. So I think currently we import fossil fuels from out of state. Historically, they've come from places like West Virginia and Colombia. Now that we're not using coal, we're seeing that from places like Pennsylvania and the Marcellus Shale. The point of that is that energy goes out of state. When the energy goes out of state, that money largely leaves our economy. It may create some jobs elsewhere, but by spending that money locally on cleaner energy, we can both improve public health, but also create jobs in Massachusetts and New England. As we have begun the transition to renewable energy, this is evidenced by thousands of jobs in solar, energy efficiency, et cetera, and some, a great potential for wind industries and perhaps manufacturing as well. As found by this study, if we are accelerating the RPS by about 3% and looking at accelerating the RPS also in Connecticut, we can have well over 30,000 jobs created in Massachusetts. So assuming only Massachusetts acted, we would still see thousands of jobs added per year through 2030. That, of course, it would change based on the exact percentage, but the 3% number would be significant for Massachusetts, and it's likely Connecticut will also have some level of increase in the near future. The RPS will also significantly impact our emissions reductions. So we talked a little bit before about why. Part of it is because fewer power plants are called upon, but it's also helping us shift other sectors over. And in general, we'll see massive reductions in the electric sector because we'll be literally getting rid of the carbon emitting sources over time. But also, ending up with, for all sectors, about or around 30% reductions relative to 1990 levels. The RPS has a modest impact economically in terms of the ratepayer impact. And it's a little bit confusing here because it actually reduces what's called wholesale energy costs. But in terms of the monthly bill impact, it is comparable to $2 per month, a 3% increase in Massachusetts. So although there are many, many factors that go into energy costs at different and what actually ends up on your monthly bill, the RPS is not a significant driver of cost increase, and there are actually cost savings baked in as well at the same time. So if you think about just roughly in the big picture why renewable energy would actually help us save money, or part of that is because, again, the power doesn't have to travel as far. We don't have to buy the fuel. So we may not have to build transmission lines. Transmission is one of the highest causes of energy prices and substantial energy costs in general, and is extremely expensive. So just noting that these price increases related to the RPS are extremely modest, but also that what you're really paying for is the development of new renewable energy. So it's not even so much that renewable energy is expensive, it's that we are having a modest sum on top of the current energy payments to bring new clean power online. Once the power is online and built, it is entirely affordable, and in fact, again, doesn't have to travel as far. So our transition can be done in a way that protects people economically, but also even the negative impacts that we do see are very minor. I'm happy to keep going. Eugenia, if you care for me to do so.
Sure. So just to reiterate, that was a helpful summary of some of the very important benefits of increasing the RPS. And to reiterate, what the analysis showed us is that we must increase the RPS by at least 2% at a minimum, because we want to align policy objectives. We want to restore balance between demand and for renewable energy and its supply. We need to affirm Massachusetts' commitment to the clean energy transition. And of course, increases to the RPS are necessary if Massachusetts is going to maintain its desired trajectory towards a clean energy future. I will note with regard to that last point that Massachusetts is not the first state to contemplate an increase in the RPS. I mentioned earlier that Connecticut was considering increasing their RPS. Rhode Island extended its renewable energy standard, which is its RPS, last year. And a number of other states have also considered or already implemented an increase in their RPS. California and Hawaii are particularly notable, given their recent commitments to an aggressive transition to a renewably powered future. So I'm going to turn it back over to Joel. What does this all mean, and where do we go from here as supporters of the RPS?
So as supporters of the Renewable Portfolio Standard, we've been thinking both about what is the sort of rights level to ask for in terms of accelerating our transition to clean energy, what is well backed by science and studies as far as what our grid can take and what we know, not just what is possible, but what will have substantial benefits beyond the climate benefits, but also economic benefits, and what also is relatable and easy to message with the public. So a 3%, accelerating the RPS by 3% per year, starting in the immediate future, let's say 2018, would work out to about 50% clean energy by 2030. So that is a target that we are adopting, attempting to get half of our electricity from green sources by that time. This is backed by the study that's mentioned as 3% or 50% by 2030 is supported by the certainly the Synapse analysis, Synapse and Sustainable Energy Advantage analysis, but also if you look at some other resources such as Acadia Center's Energy Vision 2030, you see that there are multiple ways for the region to get to between, let's say, 40 and 57% clean electricity by 2030, and that if the region of New England is in the 40s or 50s range, Massachusetts is likely to be ahead of that. So we see, although there are multiple configurations for how we can do this, and some of them would include more things like hydropower than others, we feel confident that the RPS 50% by 2030 is a reasonable target, and it doesn't preclude people from actually pushing more aggressive solutions. But it's one that we can credibly say is beneficial to our economy, will create thousands of jobs, is entirely achievable, and works well with other energy policies such as modernizing our electric grid, incentivizing the adoption of electric vehicles, our solar incentive programs, and other policies as they arise. One other thing that is definitely important to note is just to think about what could the criticisms be, and what what might the naysayers say. So so I just want to go through a couple of the potential criticisms and to give people some tools to think about and respond to them. One thing that comes up is just, are there sufficient resources available to meet an increase in the Renewable Portfolio Standard? There's a couple of different ways to think about this. One is sort of a markets way, like is there enough supply to meet the demand? Another way is like, where are we going to put all this energy stuff? Where are we going to build it? So to go to the first one, the RPS is a demand driver. We have seen consistent response to the RPS, and know that, again, we have to accelerate the RPS just to keep supply and demand matched. But basically, as the demand increases, we are certain to we are certain that the supply will in fact rise to meet that demand. There is more renewable energy potential. There have been a lot of different ways of looking at the the current amount of renewable energy resources we have, the technical potential, the theoretical potential, what we could do. I just want to say that, in a sort of when we started to push some of these really innovative green policies around 2008, I was looking at a state study recently around sort of the projected resources we might get by for things like solar, for example, by 2020, and the projection was 200 megawatts. And the current supply of solar PV or photovoltaic energy in Massachusetts is close to 1,600 megawatts. So not only have we blown projections out of the water, but that also doesn't even come close to what the theoretical potential is if we put solar, on many, many more roofs, put it on more fields, responsibly siting, but use more parking lot canopies, et cetera. And beyond things like solar, there are very readily available, I think, there are large portions of land-based wind opportunities in northern New England, particularly in Maine, and there is a enormous supply of offshore wind, or potential supply of offshore wind, along the Atlantic coast, and including right in our region in the Northeast. So the RPS has a history of working perfectly as a demand driver. Supply will follow, and there is certainly space to build the stuff, and we could use a lot more renewable energy being constructed. So it's important we get on giving that demand signal to the renewable energy developers. So the another question is about cost. We have talked about this a lot. There's a feeling that renewable energy may be too expensive, or that energy prices will go up significantly. There's actually a lot we can do to moderate or reduce energy prices. But as we noted, outside of all that, if we accelerate the RPS, the modeling shows it's around 15 cents to $2 increase per month, something that is very reasonable to pay for cleaner air, also healthcare savings, fewer hospital visits, etc. But part of the reason that increase is so low is also because there are savings embedded, like reduced wholesale energy costs, etc. To the extent we actively plan over the coming years so that we do not have to build superfluous transmission lines or other, we can avoid certain grid upgrades or invest in grid upgrades that allow us to avoid more expensive options. We can actually end up saving money through using the RPS in conjunction with other policies and with a sort of wholesale conversion of the electric grid. But the cost of the impact, just in isolation, the impact of the RPS on energy cost is fairly insignificant. So another thought about renewable energy is that it will kill jobs. Again, we're trying to give you opposition talking points here. It's not things that we believe, but just clearly, again, from the research and from also our current clean energy industries in Massachusetts, accelerating the RPS is actually going to create thousands of jobs in the region. Part of this is because, again, we send billions of dollars out of state. We have potentially done that because we don't drill for power here, or excuse me, we don't drill for oil or gas in Massachusetts. We don't have those resources. We have been sending, millions or billions out of state since we had sort of industrial power plants, and perhaps before that. But we are now in a position where we're able to start recapturing more and more of that money into our economy. In addition to the clean energy sectors, we can that money will manifest in other sectors as money that can be spent in our state. Finally, some people will argue that because Massachusetts is a national leader, we don't need to do more on clean energy, or we don't need to do more on energy efficiency. This is a little bit of a silly argument because not only do we want to stay as a national leader, but it is not necessarily a great thing to just rest on our laurels. Particularly, we know that global climate change is a huge threat, and we want to be continuing to model visionary solutions. So I think one way to think about this too is right now we have this RPS, we have thousands of clean energy jobs, we have award-winning energy efficiency programs, et cetera. But at our current rate of 1% per year, we won't. Our energy supply won't be entirely green until something like 2105. So until the next, it will take into the next century to green our electricity supply at the current rate. That is not, I would say, a pathway towards leadership. It's a pathway towards, continuing climate instability and suggesting to others that it's okay to stick with the status quo. So we can celebrate the accomplishments we've had in the homegrown industries of renewable energy, but we actually need to move faster. And one thing that is great is that our renewable portfolio standard has it's not only done a lot already, but it has strong standards. So we really are targeting it towards local clean energy in New England, and we should accelerate that to continue to build on what we've achieved in the past.
Thank you, Joel.
I think that is, yeah.
You covered a lot of ground there. So just to reiterate, the RPS is a driver of demand. It is a job generator. It is an important climate mitigation strategy, and it is important to consider adjusting it if we are, in fact, going to maintain our desired trajectory towards a clean energy future. So with that, I just want to touch upon pending legislation quickly. Joel mentioned earlier that last year there was one provision in the Senate version of the energy bill that addressed an increase in the RPS. It didn't actually make it into the final bill, but it got the conversation started. This year there are 8 pieces of legislation that have been filed between the House and the Senate that include a provision or are entirely focused on increasing the renewable portfolio standard. The study that we reviewed today is very important because it helps sort of identify a point at which we might want to start the conversation. Right now, each of these bills includes a different starting point, a different stopping point, and so the study that was completed helps us identify that at a minimum we shouldn't be talking about anything less than 2% per year, and we can credibly go up to 3% or perhaps even more. So the bills at this moment have been assigned to the Energy Committee. There have not been any hearings scheduled on the RPS. We anticipate that a hearing will be scheduled in the fall. And in the meantime, we are working with many of our partners and collaborators to run a series of trainings on the Renewable Portfolio Standard, similar to this webinar, but also in-person trainings or over the phone with constituents in districts and with other organizations and partners in advocacy, all with the goal of helping folks understand the Renewable Portfolio Standard and its role in driving clean energy development in Massachusetts and in the region, and also in terms of in-district training, the goal there would be to help constituents schedule meetings with their representatives to have this conversation. And we have to give a huge shout out to Sierra Club because they've done a yeoman's task really trying to schedule a number of trainings already and have scheduled several meetings with constituents, and they will continue to do so. If you have any interest in being part of those trainings or in scheduling one in your community, you can certainly contact me or contact Joel. We're working also with our friends in Mass Power Forward and as I noted, Sierra Club. And then between now and the fall, it's just going to be very important to do outreach to legislators, to draft letters of support, letters to the editor, op-eds, to really drive the conversation around this idea of achieving 50% renewable electricity supply by 2030. It's part of a dialogue that's already underway in the context of pursuing the 100% renewable goal. And it relates directly to many of the conversations that are happening in other spaces around grid modernization, the acceleration of electric vehicle deployment, the renewed or the revised incentives for solar, and so on and so forth. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Q&A. If you have a question, the best way to ask it is to go ahead and use the chat function. And I while I wait to see if there are any questions, I will mention that one of the questions that was raised earlier this morning in the earlier webinar was whether or not this goal of 50 by 30 is a ceiling or a floor. And I think Joel noted well that we can use the analysis conducted by or done by Synapse and SEA to credibly argue for at least 2% and certainly push for 3%. 3% and roughly works out to be 50 by 30, as Joel noted, and we have the credible analysis to back it up. So I see a question here. The state legislature often waits until the end of its two-year session to vote on important issues. When do you think the RPS legislation might come up for a vote? That's a great question, and I'm sure Joel has some insight into that as well. At this moment, because there has not been a hearing scheduled for the RPS, it doesn't look like it's not necessarily likely that the issue will be resolved before 2018, and it might be something that's pushed into the second year of the legislative cycle. But that's why it's so incredibly important to do this outreach and education and to reach out to legislators, because there is still time to push for a hearing before the legislature breaks for the summer. Joel, I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
I would just think of it like this. If you think about where we are now, right, June 2017, knowing that the legislative session will end in July 2018, what's important, and also that we're expecting a hearing in the fall, what's important is that you both reach out to your legislators immediately, as soon as possible, and also that if you have friends, neighbors, coworkers, members of your congregation, etc., who you think could get involved, first you can certainly forward them our slide deck and webinar after the recording is complete. But we want to come to you and help run trainings to get more people. We want to help you schedule legislative meetings, whether it's in your area or in Boston. So please reach out to us by email, by phone, etc., as soon as possible, and we will help work with you to get that done. There is another question I see regarding how will the new SMART, which is the Solar Incentive Program, influence the Renewable Portfolio Standard. I don't think there is a complex answer to this. I think the simple one is that the study that keeps being referenced, Synapse Sustainable Energy Advantage Study, accounts for the successful implementation of the SMART program. Again, solar is one RPS eligible resource. So while these policies interact, they both influence renewable energy development. We don't have a more nuanced response to that now, except to say that we are assuming the growth of solar will continue based on the presentation of a new incentive program and the extreme, the continued customer demand for solar moving forward. Eugenia, if you want to add anything else to that, please do.
Sure. The only other thing I'll add is that because the base case in the analysis assumes full implementation and achievement of the SMART incentive program, it is contributing to that oversupply of RECs that we spoke about. So it is another reason, it's adding to the argument for why we need to increase the RPS, because if we do all the solar that the SMART incentive program is creating the opportunity to do, and we get all the wind that the procurements require, then we're going to have more RECs than we need, and the RPS will help address that concern. So it's built into the base case of the analysis, it's just one more reason why we need to push to make sure we achieve everything that has been set out as a goal for the program. Are there any other questions? Oh, here's a question. It says, Sorry. Increasing the RPS is critically important. Are there other energy and climate-related policies that you believe are equally important or nearly so? For example, what about a carbon tax or fee to influence transportation? That's a fantastic question. I think that given the challenge that climate change presents, we have to kind of leverage any and every policy and strategy to address it. But so there's no one thing that's better than the other. However, I do like to point out that at this point we have a renewable portfolio standard in place in Massachusetts, and so the push here is really to adjust that RPS and to see it increase on par with what's required to achieve our goals. It is complementary to a carbon fee or price, an additional gas tax, greater energy efficiency. As Joel noted, many of the programs and policies that are in place are being considered work well with an RPS. It does not have to be an either or. But it is, in my opinion, I think that the conversation around increasing the RPS indicates that it might happen a little bit sooner than perhaps some of the other approaches that are being considered. I could be wrong, though, and I would love to be proven incorrect. I'd like to see it all happen at once. The next question, we mentioned a half a dozen bills. Are there one or two that we favor?
Could you actually go back to the old other slide on that when you have a second, Eugenia?
Sure. And there we go. So I know that.
Go ahead.
Great. Go ahead. No, I was going to say I know that Joel and Clean Water Action favor a couple of bills in particular. So I'll go ahead and let you answer first, Joel.
Okay. So there are a number of good bills here. I just want to mention a couple of things. Some of the bills take a slightly different. They have a different take at the issue. So one of the bills listed there, Senate 1846. An act relative to solar power in the grid economy by Senator Eldridge. That would be a 50% renewable portfolio standard by 2030. It also would set a new statewide solar target, so it's both the renewable portfolio standard and some solar policies, and also removing barriers around net metering. So that is one that we've looked at both RPS and solar. I would just mention one other one. So that policy only applies to the investor-owned utilities, Eversource and National Grid. Mass Energy in particular has been lead on a House Bill 2700 or 2700 by Representative Kay Kahn. That bill is set currently at a 2% increase, but also would apply to the municipal light plants, given that there is a strong case for a 3% and or 50 by 30 goal. Some of the legislation potentially it's possible that some of the legislation that's out there may be revised. I would just note that there is an interesting bill out there by one of the high-ranking House members, Representative Haddad, which would set a 40 by 30 target, but that allows the state agencies to go faster if necessary. So, or if they deem it wise. So there's quite a number of approaches, but I think that we might think about setting an ambitious target and whether or not other policies should be included. Should it just be RPS? And should we give some discretion to state agencies to accelerate? There's a number of good ideas, and multiple of them Clean Water has been working on Senate 1849, as I mentioned, Senate 1846, but there are generally the legislation that's listed here is all helpful in moving in the right direction.
Great. I wanted to mention Joel's reference to the municipal lighting plants reminded me that although the study didn't look at the munis in particular, the scenario of 2% per year plus 1.5% per year in Connecticut is a rough proxy for what would happen if the municipal lighting plants were to be asked to comply with the renewable portfolio standard. So that's a point of reference. I do think that it is important to start the conversation about how to engage munis in this push for green energy. The reason being that as I mentioned, munis comprise about 13 to 15% of state load. So if we're only focusing exclusively on the investor-owned utilities and, sorry about that, a little background noise, investor-owned utilities and competitive suppliers, then we're not going to get to full clean energy transition, as they're only about 87% of the overall load. Are there any other questions? I'll mention that a question was raised this afternoon about how the increase in the RPS fits in with communities that are exploring green municipal aggregation. That's also a fantastic question. And I think the way we framed the response to that is that the community, and Joel, actually you did a wonderful job of answering this, so I am going to ask you to chime in, but communities pushing for green municipal aggregation have already demonstrated a strong commitment to increasing their renewable energy, renewable electricity in their communities. They are community by community pushing for an increase in the RPS when they commit for an amount over and above what's currently required. And so I think that that makes communities and community members where this is happening, makes them very good advocates for the increase in the RPS because they can speak from experience, and a municipality can demonstrate that, or can speak to the fact that it's already demonstrating a desire to see Massachusetts double down on its commitment to renewables. And Joel, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add there.
So thank you, Eugenia. So community choice aggregation, or green municipal aggregation, I should say, is kind of like the local, municipal, and voluntary acceleration of the renewable portfolio standard in a way. We view it as a building block that indicates that cities and towns have the demand, are showing the demand, and want the state to move faster. It is meaningful for communities to do this. They can set it well above the RPS, whether that's 5% above, or like Brookline recently did, something like 20 or 25% above, a really remarkable clean energy commitment. But what I think makes sense for activists who are pursuing this, or for people who have, in fact, had aggregation go through successfully, particularly green aggregations go through successfully in their community, is say that we did this, it worked, we like it, we want clean energy, and now we are contacting our state reps, we are contacting our state senators, we are saying we want the state to move to. You know, first you start in your home, you do what you can, you go into your community, you do what you can. At some point you have to ask for leadership from the state government to do what it can, particularly when the federal government is moving in the wrong direction.
Are there any other questions this evening? We have a few more minutes, and feel free to throw an additional question out there. I am going to stop recording at this time, and you're quite welcome this evening. Thank you very much to everyone who was able to join this Renewable Portfolio Standard webinar. We will be making all of the information available to attendees. And I just see one more question. Are we planning a collaborative lobbying day similar to what Mass Power Forward did in February? I would say quite possibly yes. It would make sense to do so, and that's one of the reasons why we're working to help folks understand the RPS and doing this education and outreach so that it can culminate in a legislative ask. So as I said, I'm going to stop recording. I will make all of the information available. If you have any questions, do not hesitate in reaching out to me or to Joel or to any of our partners in this work, Emily Norton at Sierra Club and others in Mass